The 4-week-long ceasefire in the Middle East has been fragile really from the start. Today, it faltered. The United Arab Emirates says it came under drone attack from Iran, the first such action since the truce began. Meantime, the U.S. is trying another tactic to get oil shipments moving again through the Strait of Hormuz. The U.S. says 2 American-flagged merchant vessels made it across successfully today after the U.S. Navy launched Project Freedom to protect ships and guide them through the strait. Katie Nicholson joins us from Washington with more details. Katie, the U.S. says it's engaged in battle with Iranian forces today. So tell us about that.
Yeah, so what we heard from the U.S. is that Iran launched missile and drone attacks on U.S. military targets and merchant ships that were in the Strait of Hormuz. And the U.S. says they didn't actually manage to hit their targets and that they also destroyed 6 small Iranian attack boats. So Iran, it denies that their boats were sunk. It's sort of the continuing theme of one side says one thing and the other side denies it. This is, of course, significant because of that April 7th ceasefire that has been shaky, but holding. So the question here is the ceasefire over or not? Trump did tell ABC News that he didn't think it was a violation because, in his opinion, it wasn't heavy firing. But then he also took a call from a Fox News reporter today and essentially said that if Iran attacks any U.S. vessel that's working on his new Project Freedom, quote, they'll be blown off the face of the earth. So a couple of different responses there from him. Gulf neighbors were also taking incoming fire today as this new project started. Oman was hit along its border with the UAE, and the Emirati Ministry of Defense says that their air defense systems engaged about 15 missiles and that 3 people were injured. We did also hear from the Saudi Foreign Ministry tonight, which issued this statement, essentially expressing the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia's condemnation and denunciation in the strongest terms of the Iranian targeting through missiles and drones of civilian and economic facilities in the brotherly United Arab Emirates, as well as a vessel belonging to an Emirati company. Of course, this has also messed up with the airspace over UAE temporarily today, which had just been recovering from the restrictions that were first put in place since the start of the war. And Sarah, we do have a statement as well from the foreign minister of Iran, essentially tying up the sort of events that unfolded today in the Strait of Hormuz, saying events in Hormuz make it clear that there's no military solution to a political crisis. So sort of the take there of the foreign minister of Iran on what happened today as this new project was beginning.
Okay, Katie, you mentioned this Project Freedom. So what more can you tell us? What is this?
Yeah, so this was announced last night after the U.S. president rejected the latest Iranian proposal. It was a 14-point proposal. So this is a U.S.-led effort with a significant military footprint. CENTCOM, the Central Command, basically put out what the layout is: guided missile destroyers of more than 100 land and sea-based aircraft, and about 15,000 service members who are involved in this. So when the U.S. president posted about this Project Freedom last night, he described it as being for the good of Iran, the Middle East, and the United States. We have told these countries that we will guide their ships safely out of these restricted waterways so that they can freely and ably get on with their business. And he did go on to say that this is meant to free up people and companies and countries, essentially, that have done absolutely nothing wrong. He called them the victims of circumstance. Despite that, this operation is not what you might think. It's not a naval escort necessarily through the strait for all of these ships, so much as a continuation or building on of a multi-nation information sharing military and diplomatic coordination effort that was already underway, and that was called Maritime Freedom Construct. So how effective this is going to be, that's the question. The U.S. says that 2 U.S. merchant ships did successfully pass through the strait today. That is, of course, nowhere near the normal volume of traffic. And Iran, of course, disputes that any ships got through, both sides saying that they control the Strait of Hormuz.
Katie Nicholson in Washington, thank you for that update.
You're welcome.
Okay, let's get into this a little bit more with Sarah Yerkes. She is a senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Sarah, it's good to have you on the show tonight. I mean, after almost a month, really, of a ceasefire, Iran and the U.S. are now trading shots again. Are you surprised?
I'm not really surprised. I mean, this ceasefire really was fragile from day one. And what we've seen is that neither side has met its objective. So it's not surprising to see that they're going to continue to sort of throw out these little bits of, this and that at each other. I think what's really important is that we see that they're not going full fledged into a heavily armed conflict again, the way that this war started. What we're seeing is each side kind of trying to show that it's still there, that it's still paying attention, but not wanting to escalate the conflict too much at this point.
Okay, but let me just pick up then on earlier today, Donald Trump saying that Iranian forces will be, quote, blown off the face of the earth if they target U.S. ships. I mean, that kind of language is anything but sort of standing back and just, sort of watching things happen here. What are your thoughts on that kind of language being used by the U.S. president?
I think when it comes to Donald Trump, I mean, it's challenging because on the one hand, you have to take him at his word. He says these kind of really bombastic, really extreme statements frequently, and often he does see them through. So we have to believe that he believes what he says. On the other hand, there's really no one else in the US government, particularly in the US military right now, and certainly not the US public, who wants to see this conflict escalate once more. So hopefully the people around Trump, those that are in his ear, are keeping him at bay and making sure that he does not actually see through the words that he said. But we should keep them in the back of our head that, he is certainly not finished with this conflict. He doesn't feel like his objectives have been met, and he's not willing to let Iran off the hook at this point.
Okay. So yesterday, the U.S. announced this initiative. What they're trying to do is break Iran's chokehold on the strait and get traffic moving again. Is this a good move for Washington? Is it something that Washington should be doing here? I mean, because we have already seen, attacks stemming from what appears to be this move to get the ships through.
Yeah, I mean, this is a risky move, and we've seen that there has been a reaction based on that risk, which is that Iran is not happy with it. They made clear from the beginning they wouldn't be happy with the U.S. trying to sort of unilaterally go around them and try to get through the strait. But from the U.S. perspective, I mean, this is something that the Strait of Hormuz is so essential to global commerce. And it's not just for the United States. We've seen so much of the global economy impacted by the closure of the strait that it is, I think, a positive step for the United States to not try to do this alone, to try to work with other countries and try to help other countries whose ships and other commerce might be stuck as well to try to get things moving. However, he is also sort of undercalculating or miscalculating Iran and what their response might be, not understanding that this is just going to sort of re-up the ire and make Iran angry once again. And as we've seen that play out in these drone strikes already.
Yeah, so Mike Wald said that the U.S. and the Gulf Arab nations are drafting a new UN resolution condemning Iran for its blockade of the strait. Does that sort of speaks to what you were saying about doing things together? So is it beneficial to the United States? And do you think that that's going to lead Iran potentially to comply with that resolution?
I think on the one hand, this is beneficial for the United States. I mean, they have so far with Israel largely been operating alone. They wanted initially for the rest of the Western countries to get on board with them to make this be Iran versus the West. And instead, it's been Iran versus the United States and Israel. That's not good for the United States. That's not helping Donald Trump's own approval rating at home. So for them to be going through the UN to get a sort of multilateral blessing for the continuation of this conflict does benefit Trump and the United States. On the other hand, Iran is not likely to listen to the UN. I mean, this is not a country that is going to say, oh, the UN told us to stop, we're going to stop. I mean, I think this is well-intentioned, but I don't expect it to actually go anywhere.
I mean, in fairness, I think we've heard similar, Donald Trump has dismissed at times things that have come from the UN as well. Do we actually, is it fair to say that we do still have a ceasefire? I was going to ask you, is it in jeopardy? But it feels like both sides are, countering what the other is purporting is actually happening in the region. And now we have shots fired here to some extent. Where does this ceasefire stand?
Ceasefire is, frankly, I think on life support at this point. So far, I do believe that both sides do not want escalation. I mean, they have every opportunity at this point to escalate. The activity that we've seen taking place since yesterday and today, I think, could have either side call off the ceasefire if they really wanted to. They haven't done that. So I think that shows that they do want to keep the negotiations going. They do want to keep some sort of diplomatic side to this. However, that ceasefire is barely holding on. And at the end of the day, the original ceasefire didn't deal with the main issues. It didn't deal with Iranian control over the Strait of Hormuz. It didn't deal with the nuclear issue. And so there's a long way to go before you get a real and serious ceasefire that's going to fully end this conflict for the long run.
Okay, thank you, Sarah Yerkes, a senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.